Welcome back to the studio. I'm Ann Marie Spatharakis. Our next guest is award-winning author Tim Lehnert. We recently sat down in Cranston to talk about his book, Rhode Island 101.
Tim Lehnert, and I'm the author of Rhode Island 101, Everything You Wanted to Know About Rhode Island, and We're Going to Ask Anyway.
So, Tim, you are originally from Canada. What brought you to Rhode Island?
Right. Well, this is, I got to say, I suppose this is digging my own grave in a way, because what gives me the right to write a book on Rhode Island when I'm not from here? As you mentioned, I'm from Montreal. I grew up in Montreal, and I was living in California, which is where I met my wife. And we moved here because she's originally from Massachusetts, and it was just a good place to live that was near her family and closer to mine.
So what made you want to write a book about Rhode Island?
Well, it's, as you know, I mean, the state has got an incredible amount of just lore and stories and history and interesting characters. And also, it's small enough that people know the state well. In other words, if you did the same book and you did it for Texas, I don't think it would work, because I really don't think people in Houston are that interested in what goes on in Dallas or in the rural parts of the state. Whereas in Rhode Island, you know, somebody from Westerly, even though they're from Westerly, they know Woonsocket, and somebody from Woonsocket, they know Westerly. They may not know it in and out, but so they have a feel. People really have an identification, I think, with the state, and so they're interested in a book on the state as a whole and the different things that make it up.
How long did it take you to write this book, and were Rhode Islanders helpful to you in the process? Yeah,
it's hard to say how long it took me, because, you know, I do various other writing gigs. So I don't really know. I mean, it's not the type of thing I did at 9 to 5 for a year, but it took me probably a year and a half to do it. And people are very helpful. One of the things I think that makes this book a little bit different than some others is that I went and asked, I've got a list of 25 Rhode Islanders, experts in different subjects, and I went and asked them for lists of 5 on different topics. And so, for instance, I have Arlene Violet gave me her 5 memorable moments as Attorney General. I have a list from a linguist on characteristics of the Rhode Island accent. Zachary Malinowski, who's a crime reporter for the Providence Journal, he's been there for probably, I think, 25 years. He gave me a list of 5 famous mob hits. You know, so I just went to these different people and, you know, picked their brain in the format of a list of 5 for the book. And most people were very, very helpful. I mean, almost everybody I approached, and vast majority of them I didn't know them before, so it's not like I was calling in favors, but they're, you know, people I'd heard about who I thought would be interesting, and I asked them, and they're very helpful. You know, as opposed to, and also other people were helpful along the way too. But
what was the most interesting fact that you discovered in writing this book about Rhode Island in your research?
Interesting and surprising. Well, I'll just tell you one that I think is kind of neat. And, you know, what I did in this book is really to try to put together a lot of information in a small package and make it very readable. So I don't go into great depth on anything. I don't think I'll be honest, I don't know if there's anything here that you're not going to find elsewhere aside from those lists from my Rhode Island celebrities. So I did some, you know, reading obviously on the history, and I think my favorite piece was that Scituate, Rhode Island was on the short list to be UN headquarters. And the reason this happened was that during the Second World War, there was something called Suttard House there. And this was a house that was used as a radio control place. They were using it, basically the Army was using it to intercept the signals of the Axis powers. So they were trying to pick up the communications of the Axis powers and the Germans to find out what they were doing. And this was a very key place, and apparently they intercepted all kinds of very valuable intelligence from this place, and they had 10 or 20 guys working there. It was all secret, of course, because it's during the war, nobody knew about it, and so they'd go in and out of this place. So this gave Scituate kind of a cachet in certain circles that, you know, hey, if you want to find the dirt, you need to know what's going on, you go to Scituate, because they're the code breakers and the radio masters over there. And of course, it's a nice location, and they thought, well, you know, it's close enough to New York. It's within good distance of an airport, of T.F. Green Airport. It's not too far from Boston, which is obviously an important center. So it has certain aspects that make it very attractive. And so it was on the list of places that were considered. A delegation came to Rhode Island from the UN, and they were shown around by Governor Pastore. And so it was, fairly serious. And I think there was another location in Portsmouth that was being considered as well. Now, of course, I don't need to tell you how the story ended, that New York, Rockefeller gave the land in New York, and maybe it would have been New York anyway. I don't know. But it wasn't a completely, fantasy thing, oh, what if, idle. I mean, the delegation did come and the governor did show them around. So I think that's a kind of a great what if. We could think of, the diplomatic cars being outside, lining the streets in Scituate, or people getting parking tickets and throwing them away as they're wont to do, So that to me is, I think, a fun kind of piece. And this is actually a kind of historical note, too.
On page 28 of your book, you list Mark Patinkin's top 5 ways to know you've been in Rhode Island too long. Have any of those come true for you yet?
Any of those are true. Well, let's say what they are before we'll see if they're true. And I can tell you I'm a good test case because Patinkin actually is not a native either. He grew up in Chicago. I think he's lived here for about 30 years, though. So this is what he says. We'll give him. You stop using turn signals. I'm very diligent about using turn signals. So no, I've kept to my ways. But I actually find more in Rhode Island, not so much the turn signal thing, but the way that people turn left in front of you, which is not normal, actually. If you're driving straight, you have the right of way. In any normal jurisdiction that I'm aware of, the person turning is always got to yield to the person going straight. But in Rhode Island, you can turn left almost with impunity right in front of someone and expect them to slow down. And sometimes you slow down, you wave them, okay, go ahead. That's fine. But a lot of people kind of abuse the privilege, and they think that they can just do it anyway. And to me, this is kind of like being in line at the grocery store. And I'll say, here, do you want to go ahead if the person has 1 or 2 items? I don't like it when people say, can I go ahead? Kind of puts me in a bad position because I'm like, well, what if I say no? Now I'm a jerk. So to me, it's kind of the same thing. I'll let you go ahead, but, you let me, So anyway, so stop using turn signals. I don't do that one. But you haven't gone to a restaurant that's more than 10 minutes away in 2 years. That may be true. I'm trying to think. I live in Cranston. We will go to dinner in Providence, but do we travel to go to dinner? I mean, if we're going somewhere else and we stop to eat, that's one thing. But will we travel half an hour to eat a meal? Probably not. So I'm going to go with them. I'm going to agree with them on that one. You may be guilty of that. You will only go within 10 minutes. Now, do you go to Greg's though? See, that would
because that would be 15 minutes from me.
Yeah, right. Well, I've got a couple of places in my neighborhood in Cranston that are minutes away, and we'll go there. Those are our first go-to places. Okay, he's got number 3. You get a vanity plate. Not my style, personally. Let's see, and the other one, he doesn't have this, of course, but he's mentioned this, that Rhode Island is famous for the status that comes with having the low-numbered plate. And so I have to reconcile myself to the fact that I'll never be in that club, I guess, unless I bought it from somebody. I don't know if you can do that, but... it is kind of neat about Rhode Island that you can actually literally be driving somewhere, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that you pull up the light and the mayor or governor's next to you. It's not... it wouldn't be shocking to come home and say that. Like, oh, okay, You start planning your retirement in Florida. I haven't started yet. I'm still too young on that score. And number 5, you start giving directions by landmark instead of street name. And so he says, and then you go under the overpass they tore down 10 years ago. And I think that's true. And I haven't really lived here that long that I have so many landmarks that have been torn down, but I have said, in fact, where such and such used to be, which of course is fairly hopeless if you're driving and you're lost and you probably don't know where the Almex used to be, So,
would you like to share an excerpt from the book?
A fun one I thought is a colleague of mine actually helped me with this, Steve Stikos, and he got from a woman called Crystal Sargent, who is a speech pathologist in Middletown. Now, this isn't on the subject of speech pathology, but is top 5 ways to detect a Rhode Island accent. Now, we kind of know intuitively what that is, but she gave us a list of specifically what is it. So what constitutes the Rhode Island accent? So I think this is kind of an interesting one. And she gives us 1 through 5, reduction of the R. So work becomes wook. Lobster becomes lobster. And number 2 is addition of an R, because if you lose an R, there's no net subtraction of R's. They have to go someplace, right? It's like energy. It doesn't, it can't be destroyed or created, or I don't know if that's correct in physics, but addition of an R. So pasta becomes pastor, and idea becomes idea. That's why my wife, her sisters are Jessica and Amanda. Number 3, elongation of vowels. Cranston becomes Cranston. And that becomes the-at. Number 4, syllable reduction. Saturday becomes Sat-D. And I mean, other famous one on that is, did you eat is Jeet. And number 5, glottal stop. Little becomes lil. And button becomes button. So I did a thing with kind of working with what she said, which was talking local about localities. So some of the cities in Rhode Island and how you pronounce them, because this is actually one where I got into trouble when I came here because I walked around saying Pawtucket, you know. Well, that's very wrong, and I had to learn that it's Pawtucket. Warwick is another one. Some people say Warwick, or they don't even, they take out the R entirely. They say Warwick. Woonsocket is another one. I thought it was Woonsocket, but that is, of course, very, very wrong, and it's Woonsocket, or Woonsocket. Coventry, this one I hear pronounced in a couple of ways, but usually not the British way, which is Coventry, the place that was bombed during World War II. I have often heard it said as Coventry. So those were hard lessons that I had to learn.
You mentioned that Mark Patinkin is also not a native Rhode Islander. Do you think that that sort of outside perspective actually helps in being able to identify what is unique about a place or people?
It may be. I don't know if it would particularly qualify you, but I certainly don't think it disqualifies you. And there's a guy who does, of course, Patinkin did in the 90s the Rhode Island Dictionary, and he has all of those pronunciations and slang and all that stuff. He did it with Don Buscott. And there's another guy who I got a list from in here called Christopher Martin, and he does a website called cohog.org, and he just collects all kinds of stuff, kind of trips around Rhode Island and little ephemera on food and on strange places. And he's from Woodstock, New York, and he just it's kind of, he does it kind of like a road trip all the time, like you're always on vacation. So I think in a sense your antennas are maybe a little up, whereas some people wouldn't. I mean, you do lose certain things in that I can't say I experienced firsthand certain things. When I talk to people, when I remember they'll say, well, I remember when I was a kid and I went to wherever it is, Rocky Point or whatever. So yeah, I mean, certain things, aspects like that you do lose, but in other places I think you might be a little more ambitious. Like, I mean, try to go out with my family. We'll go around the state and we'll go to different places. And sometimes I'll talk to people who lived here their whole life and they'll say, yeah, Cold State Park. Yeah, I heard that's really, say, we went to Cold State Park. Say, I heard that's really nice over there. I'm thinking, it's only in Bristol. Like, how could you, I mean, I'm not saying you should go there every week, but I mean, how could you have spent like 50 years there and you've never somehow managed to get over there just once, So, in a way, I think you sometimes have a little bit more of, the kind of cliche when somebody goes to New York, they go to the Empire State Building, and the person's lived in New York their whole life has never been. Well, kind of why would they? Because it's always there, and somebody will come from out of town and they'll take them there. So sometimes it makes you a little more, I guess, maybe ambitious to get out and check out things around the state.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you now is that we're in sort of full swing of the holiday season, and this book is such a great gift. It's packed with information that some of it people may already know, but probably a lot too that will be surprising even for lifelong Rhode Islanders. It's just, a really fun gift. What can people expect when they pick up your book?
Well, it's a lot of little pieces put together, and I tried to, kind of like a chocolate chip in every bite, I tried to every page to have some little fun little nugget, so there are people who've written some excellent histories on the state, people, Stanley Lemons and Patrick Conley, who are very prolific and have written a lot of great books on the state. This is not like that in the sense that it's much smaller, it's little pieces. So it's I think it's kind of a fun thing just to pick up and you can thumb through it, and there's a lot of, there's a crime chapter, there's a nature chapter, there's a slang chapter, there's something on the chapter on the economy, there's one on called The People. It's kind of an ethnicity in Rhode Island. So there's a little pieces for everyone. So it's funny because somebody told me, she said, my son, he doesn't really like to read, but he really liked your book. So I was like, all right, I'm taking that as a compliment, but it is kind of in that kind of format of like a People's Almanac, that type of thing, on the state. And then there's a lot of, like I said, the fun kind of guest stars, like, for the weather chapter, I got John Giorsey to have his 5 memorable weather events, and Tony Petrarca, the challenges of forecasting Rhode Island's weather. So there's a lot of kind of like names that people know, and people I think are have something to say too, not just kind of a name, but actually somebody has something to offer. And it's something that I think locals like. It's not a guidebook. I mean, it's not something if somebody was visiting Definitely gives you tips on the place, but it's not the type of thing that will tell you where to, where to stay or where to eat, or, it's got some stuff on different parks, different things you can do, but it's not a guidebook in that sense.
Yeah, and it's also nice if you have a friend or a relative from Rhode Island that for whatever reason is no longer living in Rhode Island.
Yes, in fact, that's one of I think a lot of people, that's one of the more popular things is to send it to, whatever, the cousin who lives in Florida or Arizona or wherever, because it'll definitely, and then you can also use it as an intro if you're trying to entice, entice somebody, oh, you want to move here? Here it is. And it's relatively inexpensive. I don't know if it's for me to say. It's $14.95, so it's not a killer.
Where can people find Rhode Island 101?
Most bookstores have got it. Unfortunately, our number of bookstores in the state seems to be dwindling. There used to be a Borders near me in Cranston, but no longer. So most bookstores have got it. I know Barnes & Noble did have it, Books on the Square in Providence. But you can also get it through my website, and that's very straightforward. It's my name. That's www.timlehnert online, and that is TIMLEHNERT online.com. If you just type in Rhode Island 101, it'll probably come up. And I sell it on there. I sell it for $14.95. Tax and shipping are included, and all copies are signed. If you want to send me an email asking to personalize it, no problem. I'll gladly write, Happy Holidays, Sheila, or whatever you want. So that's one. You can go directly to the source, which is me. Just go to my website and you can order it from there. Or I always say, patronize your local bookstore if at all possible, because that's kind of the lifeblood of people who are for readers and writers. And
the book also has a Facebook page.
It has a Facebook page, yes. So same thing, it's Rhode Island 101 book. It's on Facebook, and I don't have a huge amount of content. I was going to mention too, actually, if people, the website is also, you can find it on the Facebook page, and I have a free download of the Essentials chapter. So if you want to just print that out and read the Essentials chapter for free, why not? And that's 20 pages or something like. I don't know if I give that as a gift. For yourself, that might be a little cheesy. Like, hey, I printed out 20 pages of a book, you put it in a manila envelope. Here you go, and if you like it, let me know, and we'll buy the book. Could be a starter. So that's on there. On the Facebook page, sometimes I'll just put up photos. I'll do around I'll go out or somewhere. I'll take a few pictures, put them up there, and just fun stuff like that. So.
Did you always want to be a writer, and did you have any challenges in order to become a writer?
I've always been a big reader, and I don't think I ever took it really seriously until I was much later in life. And I did, I was a claims adjuster. I did a number of different things. I've taught English. I used to work and manage a bookstore, a chain bookstore. And, at that time I didn't really write, and now, I do a lot of writing, kind of bread and butter writing for an immigration law firm. And then I also like to, I'd love to do a kid's version of this. I don't know what's going to happen, but, and I do, I write some, short fiction, and then I do like op-eds and little essays and things like that. So I don't know why now I sort of have the, I don't know if it's the confidence, but I don't know, I didn't really put it out there before for some reason. I don't know what I was waiting for. Because I have always been somebody who's a big reader, and so I don't know I don't know when the light kind of went on that exactly. So, in terms of getting, I think for some people it's not so much, it's great to be able to say like, I always wanted to be in the movies. Sometimes you hear this, and from every time I was 8 years old, and and they tell all the steps they went through, and they, and then they do this. But I don't know. There's a lot of people when you talk to them, you find out, well, they actually didn't. Either they didn't exactly know, or they didn't quite visualize themselves and taking the concrete steps to do it. They didn't think it was possible, or that they were capable at some level. I don't know. So it's kind of interesting. So it was a long path in a way, but it's always something I've been. I've always been a reader, and I've always been kind of engaged in. I always like literature and kind of culture and these politics and these different aspects. So.
I'm asking people this week, what's the best advice you've ever received or ever given? So what's the best advice you've ever given?
Always have quarters in your car, because when you get to a parking meter and you don't have quarters, you really don't want to. You really hate to be caught without quarters. So of course now it's getting more possible to use a card and things like that. But you just don't want to be caught in that kind of situation. You know what? I really refrain from giving people advice because I always find it always sounds good. You know, these sort of like grand pronouncements. You know, never. You'll always regret what you didn't do, not what you did. You know, which sounds great until the person's standing there just been arrested for drunk driving or something like that. Oh, really? You know, I mean, so it never seems to, you know, things change over time. And I'm actually one thing I mean, obviously I try to give guidance to my own kids, but I do try to resist that kind of like those kind of grand statements about, you know, but you know, that somebody's going to sort of pass on, you know, there's some little secret that's out there and somebody's going to pass it on to you and that can be summarized in a sentence or two. So in terms of advice, specific advice, I'm always in favor of, you know, whether it's about taxes or what phone to get or, I don't know, you know, what route to take somewhere. But as to that general life advice, you know, other than the obvious things about try to do your best and be kind to people, I don't know what kind of grand, you know, well, it's not bad, right? Let's turn it on you. What's the best piece of advice you have received?
You're turning it around on me. You know, I think the best advice that I've ever received is to be myself.
Well, you can't have the same regrets if it doesn't go right, then you can only, but it doesn't go right and you're trying to be something else that you're not, then that you have, I think, more profound regrets than.
Yeah, I think it's kind of easy to kid ourselves about who we really are, so then we end up inadvertently being dishonest with other people. You know, to really answer the question, who am I really, and who do I really want to be, and then go and be that. Sometimes it takes courage. It's simple, but not necessarily easy. So I think I have found that to be very helpful.
Right. Well, I found, you know, in terms of if I was to look back, I'm thinking advice, I don't know if I would give somebody, probably I might say something like, you can try to keep your options too open. And I think that's often people say, well, keep your options open. And I kind of feel like, you know, at a certain point, you have to choose some path and and it can always change and nothing's forever and nothing's guaranteed. You know, we know everything, people in their lives, their relationships can change. That what they think is, you know, things can change, or, you know, technology changes and, you know, you're in some field and all of a sudden you're a travel agent, you're going great. And then, hey, business isn't so good. It's the same in writing, publishing, music, all, you know, people in these fields are having incredible stress right now. Changes. You know, my point being though that, you know, things can always change and you can't, you know, you can never guarantee the future, but at a certain point you do have to, you know, try to commit to something. And so I would say I'm now going to say that would be my piece of advice is that, yeah, keep your options open, but try to, you know, work towards something. And even if that might change, well, there's no way of knowing it. So
Tim Lehnert, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much to Tim Lehnert and Dr. Santi Mounier for their insights. Our question of the week was, what's the best advice you've ever received? And Miranda on Facebook wrote, mistakes are just experiences that turn into part of your life story. And Mary contributed, do the best you can with what you've got. And also a quote from Teddy Roosevelt, do what you can, where you are, with what you have. Thanks so much. Yeah, Tim Lehnert was kind enough to give us an autographed copy of the book Rhode Island 101. If you were the first person to write on the Ann Spatharakis Productions Facebook wall what you love about Rhode Island, I'll mail you a copy. You can find us on Facebook to hear these conversations and hopefully share them with others. Keywords Ann Spatharakis Productions. Thank you so much to WBLQ, streaming live worldwide at WBLQ.net, and to Lauren Keinkoff. Takeaways for the week, take one day at a time. Be yourself, stay focused, and may you always have quarters for those parking meters. I'm Ann Marie Spatharakis. We'll see you next week in the studio.